Welcome to today's Masterclass Explainer. I'm your host, stepping in as your economics professor for the next few minutes. We're going to master the mechanics of macro imbalances, and by the end of this, you'll be totally equipped to ace that crucial Q2 8 6-mark combined essay on inflationary and deflationary gaps.
Here's the syllabus for this explainer. 1. The economic engine. 2. Running hot with the inflationary gap. 3. Running cold with the deflationary gap. 4. The causes behind these imbalances. And 5. The policy toolkits to fix them.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the economic engine, understanding the baseline.
Before we can fix a broken engine, we absolutely need to know what it sounds like when it's purring perfectly. Think of our macroeconomy as this engine. On one side, you have aggregate demand. That's the total planned spending in our economy, fueled by 4 main components. We've got C for household consumption, I for investment by firms, G for government spending, and X minus M for net exports. Now, for our economic engine to hit equilibrium with stable prices, this total aggregate demand has to perfectly balance with aggregate supply, which is the total value of goods and services actually being produced.
So, the key here is that our engine runs at peak efficiency in a state we call full employment. But wait, a quick professor's note on this. Full employment doesn't literally mean every single person has a job. It just means everyone willing to work at prevailing wage rates is employed. Real-world data shows us that even at full employment, there's always a natural 3 to 4% rate of frictional unemployment. You know, people temporarily between jobs or maybe affected by tech shifts. So, that's our baseline perfection.
But here is a masterclass question for you. What actually happens to this perfectly balanced engine if we suddenly start demanding way more goods than our factories and workers can actually generate?
That brings us to Section 2, running hot, the inflationary gap.
Let's see what an overheating engine looks like. In macro terms, we call this excess demand. It's pretty straightforward. It simply means our aggregate spending is higher than the economy's maximum production capacity at full employment. Basically, we want to buy more than we can physically make. If you look at the graph here, it maps out the crisis perfectly. That 45-degree line, that's our aggregate supply. And down on the bottom axis, YF is our maximum full employment output. Notice that gap labeled AE. The new demand curve, AE1, has pushed right above that original full employment equilibrium. The catch is, because our available resources are already fully employed, we can't just magically conjure up more goods to meet this new demand. So what happens? This excess demand throws off our balance and shoves the price level up. And that exact upward pressure on prices is why we call it an inflationary gap.
Okay, so we've seen the danger of an overheating engine. But what if the exact opposite happens? What if households and businesses just get spooked and suddenly stop spending altogether?
Let's look at Section 3, running cold, the deflationary gap. So here we have the exact opposite problem, an economy running way too cold. We call this deficient demand. This kicks in when our aggregate expenditure, our total planned spending, falls short of what the economy is actually capable of producing at full employment. We're literally leaving productive potential on the table.
Let's break down the mechanics here. Notice the gap labeled EA between the higher full employment demand curve and that new, lower AE1 curve. Because demand has tanked, firms suddenly find themselves sitting on excess, unsold stock. To survive, they have no choice but to cut production, which drags us down to an underemployment equilibrium at Y1. Workers get laid off, the engine stalls, and that excess supply causes a general drop in prices. That right there is your deflationary gap in action.
Moving on to Section 4, causes of macro imbalances, why the engine fails.
Now that we know exactly what these gaps look like on a graph, we need to play diagnostician. Why does our engine fail in either direction? For your exams, it is super helpful to remember that these causes are perfect inverses of each other. Excess demand is triggered when the propensity to consume rises, private investment surges, or government spending spikes without matching taxes. Oh, and an increase in the money supply or a jump in exports will also fuel that fire. On the flip side, deficient demand hits when the propensity to save goes up, which naturally means consumption falls. A drop in investment, a cut in government spending, or banks tightening up credit will totally starve the engine of the fuel it needs.
So we've diagnosed the exact causes of our stalling or overheating engine. But, identifying the problem is only half the battle. What tools do governments and central banks actually use to tune it back to perfection?
Let's dive into Section 5,
the policy toolkits, fiscal and monetary fixes.
All right, time to put on our mechanics hat. This right here is your ultimate cheat sheet for that 6-mark essay response. It lays out how we use levers like taxes, government spending, bank rates, and reserve ratios in completely opposite mirror image ways, depending entirely on whether we're fighting the fires of inflation or the deep freeze of deflation. Let's break these down.
Let's start with fiscal policy, which is controlled by the government. To fix excess demand, the government has to cool things down. They're going to aggressively increase direct taxes to absorb your excess purchasing power. They'll also ramp up public borrowing to pull more money out of circulation while slashing their own public expenditure and deficit financing. But if we're dealing with deficient demand, they do the exact reverse. They cut taxes to give you more disposable income, they massively increase public work spending, think building bridges and roads, and they engage in deficit financing to essentially create new money and jumpstart the economy.
Next up, we have monetary policy, which is handled by the central bank. To fix deficient demand and stimulate a stalling economy, the central bank will decrease the bank rate to make borrowing cheaper. They'll actively buy government securities via open market operations to inject fresh cash directly into the commercial banks. And finally, they'll lower the cash reserve ratio, which lets those banks lend out way more of their deposits. And if you guess that they do the literal exact opposite during an inflationary gap, like raising rates, selling securities, and hiking up reserve ratios to restrict credit, well, you'd be absolutely right.
So here's the crucial point for your success. The masterclass secret for locking in that full 6-mark score is tying all of this together logically. First, you got to define the specific gap. Second, draw the Keynesian cross diagram accurately, explicitly showing the AE curve shift and the resulting gap. And third, clearly apply and contrast the exact fiscal or monetary policy levers needed to shift that curve right back to the baseline.
You now have the full macroeconomic toolkit, but I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder after today's explainer. If the blueprints for tuning the economic engine are really this clear, and the levers are this well defined, why does the real world still suffer from massive, unpredictable recessions and runaway inflation? Keep that question in mind as you continue your economic studies. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next explainer.